My client asked me a really good question about stomach acid. She just started working with me last week, and so we're waiting for test results. I sent her the kits. She has produced the samples. She has sent them to the lab. We will be waiting a couple weeks or so for the results to get to me, and then I will provide an evaluation of the results and her personalized plan. But here's the thing. In the meantime, her and I have work to do, and we already started gathering some data from her that she has been providing me. And so when I looked at her food journal, what she's eating and what she's drinking and her blood sugar readings, just from that data, I was telling her that I do suspect thus far that she isn't producing enough stomach acid. And that's why she's having all of these bloating issues. And she said, oh, okay. Well, I also have reflux, acid reflux. And that was interesting that she just mentioned it to me then, because in her intake forms, she did not put that as an issue that she has. But bloating, that is an issue all the time. And so I said, okay, with your bloating symptoms, that's telling me something is going on with your stomach acid production. And then now that she added she has reflux, the more I am so convinced. And of course, the more data that will come in, we will be able to see whether or not that is one of the root causes for her issues that she's having. And so from what she's eating and the nutrient composition, I started to tell her that I believe because of certain nutrients she was missing, that this also contributes to low stomach acid production. But this is her question. Her question is, because I have acid reflux, I thought that I'm producing way too much stomach acid. And you're telling me that my stomach acid production is low? And I said, yep. Let me begin to tell you the explanation, I told her. So we have been brought up to believe that when you have acid reflux is because you are just producing way too much acid. And that, for the most part, is farthest from the truth. And so a lot of people go to their physicians and they ask them for help because of this acid reflux. And typically many are put on antacids, which they could be H2 blockers or proton pump inhibitors. And for a time, it can help initially, but then the longer an individual takes this, then it can backfire. And for some, perhaps acid production is truly high. And then as these individuals continue to take the medication, it then makes the acid production go the opposite and causes more issues in the long run. Okay, so there's that with that. And there are other reasons why someone is not producing enough stomach acid. But let me explain what is going on. So God created us and designed us so that at the bottom of the esophagus, okay, the esophagus connects like from the throat, the bottom of the throat, all the way down to the top of the stomach, the opening of the stomach. And right there at that point where the esophagus connects to the stomach, there is a valve, or what we call the lower esophageal sphincter. It closes, it opens, it closes and opens, and it closes so that we won't continue to eat ourselves through if it is not time for food to continue to pass on. And here's the thing, when there is enough acid that is raised in the stomach, and from last week's episode here on Harmonized, I talked about the importance of the stomach having enough acid So the pH is on the lower end. And so when the acid level reaches a certain point, when it gets elevated within the stomach, then that lower esophageal sphincter senses that and it closes. Okay, good, but it closes in the right time so that the acid won't escape through the esophagus and going into the back of our throats. That's the original design. However, when our stomach acid production is low, then the sphincter is not able to sense the acid coming up appropriately because there's not enough stomach that's being produced. And so what happens is that this valve remains floppy. Okay, it remains floppy for the duration of time until that gets fixed, until acid production is addressed and the individual is producing enough stomach acid. But if that is not being treated, there's not enough stomach acid, then, oh boy, that floppy valve will then cause issues. Okay, and let's pause there for a moment. What we need to keep in mind is that stomach acid production is produced when we are chewing our food thoroughly and so well. When we are chewing so well, it signals to the stomach, oh, you need to produce stomach acid because food is going to come down. Okay, so start doing your job down there so that digestion can continue. Digestion begins in the mouth, but it can continue thoroughly, that food can be continually broken down, protein can be broken down, especially, and then it can get absorbed, go into the small intestines, into the large intestines. However, when there is not enough stomach acid, then this acid is not able to kill off the bacteria that we don't want from the food that we eat, from the beverages that we drink. That's not a good thing. So we have a lot of bacteria that then is again not being killed off, so it escapes through our stomachs, into the small intestines, the large intestines. And this then allows food to be fermented. It gets putrefied in the stomach. It can stay in the stomach for a while longer than it should. And it is producing gas. And this gas is what makes people feel bloated. And then, because there's not enough stomach acid to close the valve appropriately, it keeps that lower esophageal sphincter a little floppy. Then the gas, within that gas, it's able to carry some of the acid and make it escape through that lower esophageal sphincter, through the esophagus, and then it goes into the back of our throats and it can cause that burning feeling. Okay, so let me explain that again. The bloating that the individual feels is a result of gas being produced from putrefied food or food that is fermented because there's not enough acid to break down the unwanted bacteria that we don't want. We want the beneficial bacteria, but we don't want too much of the undesirable bacteria. We really don't want that undesirable bacteria. Everything needs to be balanced, but we need more of that beneficial bacteria. And so let me take that back. The undesirable bacteria it's like, well, there's pathogenic bacteria. That doesn't happen a lot. That doesn't overgrow in a lot of people, although it can happen and that can cause issues. But with the majority of the clients that I see, when I say the undesirable bacteria, I shouldn't say that. It's just because there's also opportunistic bacteria. And that type of bacteria, if you have too much of that, that can lead to the gas, the bloating, either diarrhea or constipation. And then we have commensal bacteria. That's the beneficial one, and we want more of that. And the stomach acid is supposed to help kill off the overgrowth, the excess of the opportunistic bacteria, the one that we don't want. It's not necessarily bad, but if you have too much of it, it causes issues. So if that isn't killed off and we have too much of that, then it produces gas in the stomach. And then that gas can then continue to go on down into the GI tract as well. However, in the stomach, if certain gases then are produced, too much of that gas, then it causes pressure, right? And then what happens is that this gas can actually carry with it a little bit of the acid, and that floppy sphincter or valve at the bottom of the esophagus that will allow the acid to escape even just a little bit, because the valve didn't close or the sphincter didn't close to keep that out, and some of it escapes. It goes through the esophagus into the back of the mouth, and so that causes issues. So we have a double whammy of the bloating and the reflux. So it is so important then, as I told my client, we need to look at the root cause why your stomach acid production is low. So that is what I am working on with her. Eventually, she is going to feel so much better once we get that stomach acid production going, and it's not just rebalancing the gut, but let's start foundationally, okay? Because that's where the imbalance begins, when we don't have enough stomach acid and, of course, unmanaged stress. But I am excited for her because she can't eat a lot these days, or for how many years she hasn't been able to eat well. And it's because, she feels so bloated too fast, too soon when she eats, but we are taking it one step at a time with God's help, and she will get better. All right, friend, if you need this help, reach out to me. Work with me in my program called the Gut and Hormone Harmonizer. All right. In all that we do, in all that we eat and drink, let us do it all for the glory of God.